Harry, thanks so much for taking the time and joining the show today.
Hey, thank you so much, Todd, for having me and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. So let's start with how you got into this big old construction industry to begin with. What's your origin story there?
You know, people laugh at this when I say this, but I've always been fascinated in the space of construction from when I was a really young kid, way back as far as I can remember, honestly, right? And I did my bachelor's in engineering, civil engineering, master's in civil engineering, and from engineering I pivoted into construction, which is a fairly natural pivot because you're in civil. I've always worked on massive construction projects, and I found the bridge between engineering and construction to be fascinating, and that's the space I continue to play it even today.
That's awesome. So what I want to center the conversation on today is really around a very untalked about topic, AI. So it's so rapidly changing how construction projects are being managed. From your perspective, what are some of the most kind of impactful ways AI is digitizing the work, maybe reducing risk, maximizing profits, all that? What's the impact of AI on the industry right now?
Yeah, no, actually, that's exactly the space we play at, the intersection between engineering, construction, and artificial intelligence, right? Both the companies that I co-founded and continue to run, KYRO as well as Think Power, that's the space we play at. From our perspective, where we really see the impact of AI to be really high is from our side, we focus on what is called as the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule, which is 20% of the processes impact 80% of the outcome in anything you do in life at the end of the day, right? So we try to dive into the 20% of the processes that are super high impactful, right? For example, it's like, hey, when a project is not set up properly on the system, it has a cascading impact, right? So time is not captured properly, which means invoices are not generated properly, which means that there is a problem with the customer because customer gets an invoice that is incorrectly coded to the wrong PO. They don't want to pay that, which causes an impact on your bottom line, cash flow issues. You need more working capital, which really a lot of construction firms just don't focus on. They all think they're making a lot of money just because of the fact that this is a very high dollar industry. It's a $13 trillion industry, right? Think about it. It's the second largest industry behind finance. So people don't think that, hey, I have a problem. But when you have a significant cash flow issue, significant working capital issue, it impacts your business. So what we try to focus on is the 20% of the processes that impact 80% of the businesses and try to focus on that. That's where I feel like AI is going to have a huge impact. A difference between the white collar work, which is, lawyers and accountants and whatnot, AI is impacting everything. And the construction space, is if done right, this could truly, truly boost profits significantly. I've read studies where it can boost up to 71%, right? So that's where I feel like AI is going to have a huge impact.
Yeah. The 71% profit increase is massive in
Yes,
construction
because
with
it's a low
the
margin
low
business.
margin, right? Exactly. Yeah. So how do you then kind of harness the AI to identify and solve that 20% of issues to really hone in on what those challenges are?
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, I'll tell you what we do in our businesses is a single word: collaboration, right? When we rolled out a new ERP system in all the other accompanying systems, right? Time and attendance, data capture in the field, daily field reporting, and so on and so forth. We collaborate between the CFOs, the COOs, the project managers, the folks in the field, where the rubber meets the road, IT. We kind of collaborate and come up with the most impactful item, right? Because if a data is not captured properly in the field, it impacts the CFO, right? Who worries about cash flow, right? So focus is really collaboration, and that's how we try to get to the end game of having AI most impact in the business.
So I want to drill down in that because one of the common challenges in construction is this disconnect between the field and the office. So how do you go about bridging that gap to improve the collaboration across the teams when they're focused on very different things. Their day-to-day is very different. Their end goal is the same, but how they get to that end goal is also very different. How do you really foster that collaboration?
Very, very fascinating question, right? A beautifully appropriately named podcast, Bridging the Gap. And honestly, I've been using the term for a long time now because that's the essence and the basis on which I started Think Power back in 2013, right? Is to bridge the gap between the field and the office. In a nutshell, if you think about it, everybody, as you said, is trying to go towards the same goal, right? But they don't recognize that. The folks in the field, their main job is to get the project built. They truly don't care about cash flow. And they don't recognize that, hey, if I don't input the right data, it affects the company and I may not have a job down the road, right? And the same thing, the office folks, you talk about engineers, project managers, accountants, finance, whatever, they don't realize that they're not revenue generators. Some of them do, right? I want to be respectful there. But they're not revenue generators. The revenue generators are out there in the field, hustling every single day, right? So you want to truly bridge that gap and have both teams, if you will, respect each other's role in making the company profitable and successful, right? And that's where I think AI will really come into play in the future. I'll give you a simple example. In Texas, at least, a huge portion of the workforce are Spanish speaking in the field. Majority of the office folks may or may not be, depends on each company, right? The demographics of each company. What we have done is to simply allow the folks in the field to communicate seamlessly with the folks in the office by, hey, having a translation, Spanish to English translation, so that nobody is really worried about how I don't know how to type in English. I'm not really good at verbally communicating in English. Using AI to truly just convey that message to the folks in the office on a regular basis, that's a huge barrier that we have helped overcome. That's in one simple example. Another example I can tell you is, as an engineer, one of the things that I've always been frustrated about is, you design stuff, but you almost always recognize that your design is never implemented in the field per the design, right? Mm-hmm. Because, constructability issues always pop up. And how do you address those constructability issues in the field? That's up to the folks in the field. And what the engineer needs is, hey, what is the as-built information? And if you make it easy for the folks in the field to provide that as-built information back to the guys in the office or the folks in the office, right? You're in good shape at the end of the day, right? Making it easy, making it user interface intuitive, eliminating the barrier for folks in the field to communicate everything. That's what the focus is on from our side.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. You're getting them to speak in their natural language. Now, I don't just mean English or Spanish for that example, but the way that they would, communicate in their vernacular of that job, put that information in, and then have it translated, into the other vernacular of somebody else's job, because even the terminology that we use is not the same throughout the construction industry in the same company. So, having AI to help really drive the feedback loop and reduce those barriers so that we're able to look at the information, have better problem solving, and be able to ultimately make better decisions there.
100%.
Yeah. So drilling into those different stakeholders and personas, I think one of the issues that pops up a lot when we talk about technology in construction is that tech comes into the industry and they use the same value props and pitch for the owners, to the contractors, to the field team, to the executives, when really that's a terrible mistake, because they all have different priorities. They all have different goals, like we've already talked about. How do you go about selling AI-driven solutions with those distinct value props in mind to those different groups, both internally within the same company and then externally throughout the different ecosystem?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really fascinating question. It's got layers and layers and layers underneath that. I mean, honestly, right? Because one of the challenge of construction in general is there are so many customers within every customer, if you will, right? Like you just mentioned, the folks in the field, the project managers, the superintendents, the CFO, the CEO, right? and their team. I mean, just so many layers to it. And there are so many personas, user personas to any project at the end of the day. Again, from our perspective, we simply try to use the Pareto principle, 80-20, right? And we try to focus on the field. And here's the reason why, right? There's a method to the madness, because that's the heart and soul of construction. People forget that. That's where revenue is generated, profits are made, or revenue is lost, and losses are generated. So if you truly make the AI software easy to use, intuitive for the folks in the field to use, and to provide you the data that moves the needle, everybody else's job becomes easier, right? I'll give you a simple example, right? Think Power, for example, we have about 20 people in the back office and probably 300 people out there in the field. And the odds are that 300 is probably going to be 1,000 in the next 1 or 2 years out there in the field. But your office folks are not necessarily going to expand at that exponential pace, rather, right? Because it's going to grow, but definitely your back office is built out. If I were to ask myself the question, who is easier to train, if there's any change in processes? The answer is simple. It's the back office. It's like they're out there, they're right here in the office. If there's a change in process system, I get everybody together, maybe a brown bag lunch and learn session, we're good to go. On the field, it's complete opposite. Every single day we're onboarding 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 people. And the easiest way you can onboard people is to make it everything available here, right? You're like, hey, you know what? Pop open your phone. There are 3 applications you use, right? Obviously, Microsoft for communications and things like that, internal communication, a software for construction management, and maybe one more software, right? You're good to go. Ideally, you're at 2, right? And if you're doing that, it's simple, because what do the guys in the field need? Time and expense, right? Documentation for as-built information. Send me the pictures of what the hell I did in the field today in daily field reporting, right? LMS for training, and even there a significant amount of AI is coming into play, right? That's all they need to do their job. You don't need to transform your field workers into knowledge workers, right? You need them to be revenue generating field workers. And honestly, you don't want them to be moonlighting as a knowledge worker, right? On the other hand, you really do not want your back office, let's call them as knowledge workers, to force the people in the field to moonlight as knowledge workers. That's where the problem begins, right? If you're keeping the roles separated out, and if you're making sure that the data from the field to the office comes in seamlessly, you're running a fantastic company.
That makes a ton of sense. You define those swim lanes and you keep them kind of in place. Sounds like the wrong phrase that I want to use, but you keep them performing where their sweet spot is. You keep them the whole right person on the right bus in the right seat mentality.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, I'm a sports fanatic. If you think about it, right, your offensive line doesn't moonlight as a defensive line, right? Your quarterback doesn't moonlight as a middle linebacker, right? Just because it doesn't work, right?
Right.
So you really think about it in those terms. You have the right people in the right seats, the right personas, and you're good to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings about change management issues when we talk about tech and implementing new processes and stuff. What are some of the kind of key lessons that you've learned in helping to maintain that employee focus while also being focused on the customer and creating that culture? How do you handle the change management?
Yeah, no, fantastic question. So, from our standpoint, really, my philosophy has always been in building companies is it's a 3-legged stool. Right. You have to take care of your employees, right? Keep the company a great place to work, make sure the positive energy flows, make it psychologically and physically a safe place to be, right? That's number 1. And number 2, you got your customers, right? If you have happy employees, you're going to really, really take care of your customers. We don't need to worry about that. And if that is done, the 3rd leg, which is your investors, they need to get their returns and they're going to be happy because the first 2 legs of the stool are happy. But how do you go about it? It's a function of, candidly, it's easier said than done. It's bringing everybody together towards a common cause And, making sure you hear everybody's viewpoint, everybody's pain points, hopefully help each other understand what the pain points of other teams are. Meaning, hey, what is the pain point of the field teams? The office teams need to understand that, and vice versa. The pain points and what drives the office teams needs to be understood by the field teams. Once those two are done, I think we're in a great shape to make any change possible, right? From a change management perspective, if you force fit change, it doesn't work. Whereas if you organically grow change management from the bottom up and bring everybody together, we're in a great shape. And that's what we've tried to do, and very successful.
That's awesome. You're really trying to strike the balance there. It sounds like between having, it has to be leader driven to help create the environment and the priorities. But to your point on the grassroots, if it's not bubbling up, solving the pain points, then the leader can be, cracking the whip all day long, but people aren't really they're going to check the box, but
It's
they're not really going to embrace
Honestly,
it.
that can work for a short period of time, but something that is sustainable has to be organically driven. And that'll last for a very, very long time, even after the leader departs, right? And that's what we strive to do.
Yeah, that long-term change. So when we talk about AI, obviously it's still seen as a threat to jobs in a huge segment of the industry. And, in my admittedly probably biased opinion, in the reality, it has the potential to really make construction jobs easier, safer, take out some of the mundane processes and stuff. Can you share some examples of how that's really happening, that's in today's world, that not the threat aspect, but the potential and opportunity side of it?
No, listen, from a construction industry standpoint, I mean, it has broad implications. Obviously, AI does, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does it make almost every job in the world different, right? Absolutely, yes, right? It definitely does make every job different, right? From a pure construction industry standpoint, there have always been inherent challenges, right? I believe it's the highest, some construction industry has the highest suicide rate, right? That construction industry has always been plagued by data silos, right? Just people just don't know. A left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, right? I believe there is 20% of the projects are longer, if not more projects. 80% of the projects overrun budgets, right? These are all because people just don't use the right tools to manage. I mean, people just use spreadsheets. It was never intended to be used that way. It's still used heavily in the construction space. So why am I saying all this, right? The key aspect of running a successful construction business is to, number one, to know your data, what the hell is happening in the field, right? And keep your people safe and run efficient processes that are repeatable, right? Now, I really do think AI is going to help us get there, right? Number one is if you're able to track what's happening in the field, there's spikes in overtime. There are spikes in people driving a lot over a period of time. And if you can compare that in real time with the impact of what those meant in the past, hey, this could mean that somebody is about to get into an accident sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
You can put a stop work authority right then and there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, which is not, from a human standpoint, unfortunately, I've been involved, I've been part of projects where fatalities have happened, and, avoidable fatalities have happened, where people just do things they should never be doing. There's no intervention in place. And I do think from an AI standpoint, at least the heavier nudge with, nudges being to different stakeholders in the same project going in to intervene can definitely help, right? That can definitely help safety.
Mm-hmm.
Suicide rates, why is it so high? Remote jobs, people are traveling all the time. And you can use the data points to say, hey, listen, this person has been out of his home for the last 6 weeks. It's time for him to take a break, right? Which from a human standpoint, maybe you don't necessarily recognize that. I'm sure there are tools already out there, but if you automate some of those things, right, you eliminate the human factor of the project managers trying to push through a project without having regard for the mental health of an employee. So that can be a huge intervention in place. So from a safety standpoint, it's a huge piece of the puzzle. from a data silo standpoint, coming in together, timesheets, invoicing, right POs used to create the right project, as-built information. I truly believe construction is one industry where AI is going to really, really drive process improvement, really drive profit improvement, and candidly make the industry much more safer if applied properly. And I think this is going to be one of the most impacted industries for much, much better. I don't think jobs are going to be lost. I think jobs will be made better. And you still need great workers in the field. You still need great project managers. You still need great engineers. All their jobs will be made better, but I do think it's going to be super impactful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm pretty bullish on it myself. But one of the things that was interesting as you were talking is, and this sounds a bit like an oxymoron, but AI has the potential to really bring more human element into the construction industry by being able to shed light on all those different stats like you were talking about with the safety aspect of it, strangely using technology to inject human emotion and just everyday life into the situation. I think that's a really cool trend. I hadn't thought of in that way yet.
Actually, you're 100% right, because in the companies I run, I really drive home this principle called as human performance, and it is truly taking our companies to the next level. What is human performance, right? You try to make sure you put processes in place to ensure what was meant to happen is what happens at any given point in time in a project, in life, whatever. So you put processes in place. That's what AI does. I mean, that's the human element brought in by intervening AI at the end of the day, and that helps. You're spot on in spotting that.
Yeah. One of the things that I feel like it's getting more popular is looking at construction workers as elite athletes, and going back to your football reference, there is treating them like they're in the NFL. So using technology. Every single NFL player has an immense amount of technology behind them to analyze what they're doing well, what they're doing wrong, where they can get improvements. I think bringing that mindset into construction makes a ton of sense, and being able to leverage AI to say, hey, this is where you're really strong at. This is where we need to shore up some safety stuff. Here's where we can get more efficient. I think that makes a ton of sense, and it's a really cool, unique opportunity to be able to come into the industry.
100%.
So looking ahead to the next couple of years, are there, obviously AI a big trend coming in, but are there other trends in construction technology that you think are going to have a big impact on the industry?
Construction is one area where things are rapidly evolving, right? I mean, BIM is something that I clearly see having a significant impact going forward, right? And the other areas that I do see in the space that we play in is how storm response, which candidly is something that impacts everybody here, right? Because, you see the LA wildfires, somebody needs to go and respond to that. How do you gather resources, almost like in a Uberification model? How do you bring different resources needed to actually respond to a big storm, right? You look at the southeast part of the U.S., there's storms all the time. Storm response teams go from all over the country to help in storm restoration. How do you, literally, I call it as Uberification of resources? How do you actually bring together people of different skill sets, equipments that are different, does different things together from thousands of contractors, and send them to a storm at the most efficient way possible, at the most lowest possible cost, and things like that, right? Those are areas where, restoration standpoint, I see a huge impact. That's a place I'm familiar with. That's why I'm focused on that. Obviously, BIM is a huge model, right? I feel like that's a big role to play, 3D drawings and things like that.
Yeah. The Uberification effect on the response team, that's super cool. I am here in the southeast here, so that would definitely come in handy. Yeah. So as we start to kind of land the plane on the conversation, a couple rapid fire questions for you. Modeling the future, what does that mean and look like to you?
Modeling the future, right? To me, it just is making a better world at the end of the day, right? You think before you act, and you're modeling things, and see the impact of it in a smaller scale in models before you actually put it into action. And that's something I've seen be done, honestly, recently, where big construction projects are modeled to see the impact of a certain door in a certain space. How is that impacting the movement inside the room? A certain air conditioning unit in a certain space, what is the impact of the airflow inside that room, right? Because we've all been in situations where the room is either hot or cold, where these kind of things I've seen and read about technologies where the modeling is really done before actually construction. I've never been part of a project like that before. I would love to be at some point in the future. And those are the kind of things that comes to my mind when I hear you say that.
Yeah, very cool. What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation to me means, how do you make the lives of people better, right? Not innovation for the sake of innovation, but hey, if you're improving the quality of life for the people who use the technology every single day, and it truly brings about a positive improvement on their quality of work, quality of life, quality of safety, quality of mental health, that to me is what innovation is, not innovation for the sake of innovation.
Yeah, seeing the bigger picture and back to that human impact of it, bringing it back to there. Love that. How do people find out more information and connect with you?
They can definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn, fairly active on LinkedIn. They can shoot me an email at hari@thinkpowersolutions.com or hari@KYRO.
Awesome. Well, very cool. Final question for you. If I could give you all construction power, you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the industry, what would you pick to innovate?
It's going to be interesting. Bridge the gap between the field and the office. Bridge the gap between the field and the office. That's what I've tried almost my entire career, bridging the gap, and that's what I would love to do. So
I love it. Bonus points too. I think you're the first person to ever use bridging the gap in this question. So I love that. It's a great way to end. Harry, thanks so much for taking the time and joining the conversation. This was awesome.
thank you so much, Todd. Deeply appreciate it, having me.